Hello, and welcome to our 7th year of COVID-19. No, that can't be right. That's what it feels like. This is Absolute Trust Talk, and I'm Kirsten Howe, the host of Absolute Trust Talk. This is our podcast here at Absolute Trust Counsel, and I'm so glad you're here today. We work with a lot of families that are struggling to help their elderly parents, their elderly grandparents. As lawyers, we can help, obviously, with the legal issues. And we also have a broad network of other professionals, so we can help people find resources to help with the things that they're dealing with, such as, choosing an appropriate living situation or getting chores done around the house, all kinds of things. And we've done episodes in the past about these kinds of things. But today, we're going to focus on not the elderly disabled parent or grandparent. We're going to focus on the caregiver, the other family members who have become caregivers because of this long-term care situation that they find themselves in. And being a caregiver is a lot of work. It can be physically and emotionally draining job. And I have invited today my guest, Elaine Sanchez, to share some of the really amazing resources that she has developed just to help caregivers. Elaine Sanchez, my guest, is the author of a book, Letters from Madeline, Chronicles of a Caregiver, which was the genesis, I believe, of everything else that she has been working on. She does training, she does continuing education for professional caregivers, and she has developed a self-paced, supportive educational series of modules for family caregivers. She runs workshops, webinars, support groups for individual caregivers. There's just so many things that she does through her, where you can find it is her website, caregiverhelp.com. And I apologize if I said that wrong. We'll get it again, caregiverhelp.com, it's just a tremendous and impressive resource for that often overlooked person in the equation, the caregiver. Elaine, welcome. And thank you so much for being here. I just can't thank you enough.
Thank you, Kirsten. I'm just honored to be a part of this show. You're doing such important work, and I'm happy to help in any way I can to inform people about caring for themselves and getting all of their documents in order. It's really, really important.
Okay. Well, so as I said in my introduction, I believe the book was sort of the beginning of your journey here. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that book and what it meant to you, why you wrote it?
Okay, I'd love to. Thank you. In 1993, my dad suffered a debilitating stroke, and my parents lived on a Kansas farm 6 miles away from a town of 10,000 people. And one of the ways that my mother dealt with her emotional stress and the isolation and loneliness of being a caregiver was to just go to her desk, disengage her emotional monitor, and write letters to me. And she was in really poor health, Kirsten, and I knew that she wasn't going to live long. And so I saved those letters. And then in 2004, I was asked to speak at our church on Mother's Day. I took a letter, read a couple of excerpts, told a couple of stories, and people came up to me afterwards and said, "You have to write a book." And it was like, I do. So I did. So that's the book, Letters from Madeline. Let's see if you can see it there. Letters from Madeline.
Great. That's great.
Caregiver. Yeah. So that was where it started.
Okay. So, and listeners can find the book, in their local books, through their local independent bookseller, or Amazon, if that's what you want.
Sure. It's distributed any place, so you just have to go into a bookstore and ask for it, and they probably don't stock it on the shelves, but they can certainly get it.
They can get it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay, so thank you for sharing that. But that's just the beginning. Since publishing Letters from Madeline, you've been developing all kinds of other resources for people just like your mom, people who are caregivers. And maybe feel isolated, maybe feel alone, even if they don't live on a farm in the middle of Kansas. You know, you could live in a big city and still feel those things.
Absolutely, especially, you know, as we've gone through COVID and people have had less opportunities to get out and get to adult daycare centers or respite programs or have somebody come in. So they really and truly have been stuck. And that's one of the reasons that I developed this new caregiver support group program, because when all of my conferences canceled for 2020, we built a studio in the home, and I started speaking virtually. And it's been an interesting thing, because I think caregivers have discovered how to use Zoom, and they realized that, you know, doing something virtually is so much easier for them than having to get their care receiver ready and get them to someplace or have somebody come in to take care of them. So it was, the timing was right to do this.
Yeah, that I hadn't thought about that. But when you think about if you are providing care to someone who's very dependent and can't do things for themselves,
right?
The idea of going to some group support meeting,
exactly,
that's like 5 hours of work.
You're right. I was just tallying this up in my mind, and it's like, okay, it's going to be 2 hours to get them up and get them dressed and, you know, get them in the car and drive them there. And then you're there for an hour or hour and a half, and then you have to bring them home. And all sorts of terrible things can happen.
Of course, yeah. And this way, there's just this ready access.
Right.
The other thing that, I mean, so you have these, you know, group support kind of meetings, but you also have things that are available on your website.
I do.
24/7. So the caregiver who can't sleep in the middle of the night because they have a tornado going on in their head.
That's right. So
talk to us a little bit about some of that.
Yeah, so I originally developed this, the first caregiver support program, video-based program, in 2012. I was on my way home from a speaking engagement. The man sitting on the plane next to me said, so if I went to your website in the middle of the night and I needed help to get through the night because I'm just, you know, crashing emotionally, would I find it on your website? And I was like, oh, no, you wouldn't. So,
Not yet.
Not yet. So I came home and told my husband that I wanted to, you know, convert my speaking keynotes and workshops into a video-based website. And he said, sounds like a lot of work. And I said, 6 months. Well, it was 3 years. And so now those videos have been up there since 2012. And I just realized it's time for an update. And so, you know, I've re-recorded, you know, with this program, I have more stories that I've collected from caregivers all across the country. The audio's better, the video's better, but I will say this, it's what's up there now is free, and it's kind of hard to beat free. So you can go to the website caregiverhelp.com and click on caregiver videos, and then you can just go through, I think there are 7 modules there. So we talk about developing an attitude of creative indifference, overcoming guilt, managing caregiver anger, depression, grief, and dementia-related behaviors and self-care. So that's what is there, and the content is good. It's just not as pretty as I would like for it to be. So
well, right, but as you say, you can't beat free.
You can't beat free. That's right.
And you know, honestly, I think when someone is feeling these intense negative feelings, any little lifeline is greatly appreciated. I've got to believe that. So
and they're probably not going to say, "Oh, why is she wearing a jacket like that?" Or "You aren't wearing jewelry anymore."
Yeah, I doubt that.
I don't think that matters to anyone but me.
Only you. That's right.
Only you. Yeah.
But we're all that way. But yeah, only you.
So the whole thing is to help people deal with their emotional stress, and I think there are a lot of programs out there that you know, have the do's, I mean, like the nuts and the bolts of caregiving, right? But I don't think there are many that I am aware of anyhow that really help people deal with the emotional stress. And I believe that is more difficult than any of the physical jobs that you have to do as a caregiver. It's just dealing with this, all of the weight of the emotional stress. And it's hard.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
hard. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it is hard. And you yourself have been a caregiver.
Oh, yeah.
I know you had an aunt who you were responsible for, and as you said initially, you had the elderly parents who
Right.
obviously needed help from you. What would you say are some of the most common challenges that caregivers experience?
I think two things that pop to mind right now. And my husband reminded me, he said, you have to talk about this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you to Alex. I had to have surgery on my foot early in June, and I was in a non-weight bearing cast, which meant that we brought a hospital bed in, and he had to take over some of the kitchen duties. And when this whole thing started, he did not know how to turn on the oven.
Oh.
And so he said,
that was a steep learning curve.
And he says, you really have to talk to people about how hard this is for the caregiver who's taking over doing things that they've never done before. And I said, you're right. It is right. And, maybe I need to teach you some skills to make it easier when I'm well. But at any rate, I think that's one thing that people don't often think about, is that you're doing everything that you have always done. And then when somebody becomes incapacitated, you have to do everything that they
used to do. Yeah.
And so you have that burden, and a lot of times it's a very steep learning curve. So then the other thing, and I think the most difficult emotion for most caregivers, is guilt, because they just feel like no matter how much they do, how much they give, they feel like it's never enough. So that's one of the modules that I think makes the biggest difference in people's lives.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're in a situation that the context is not usually, this is a temporary thing and you're going to get better.
Right.
We're talking about long-term care, sort of end of life, in the end of life phase. And, the best we can do is make it as good as we can make it, but it's not going to get better.
It's not going to get better. And can I share with you a quick strategy that I use for helping people get over guilt? So I really encourage people to think, okay, what was the incident or what happened that made you feel guilty? And then ask, did I intentionally inflict physical or emotional pain on another person? And if the answer is yes, well, then guilt is appropriate.
You're guilty.
You're guilty. So you should do whatever you need to do to make good on that. But I think more often than not, caregivers feel guilty for their feelings. And so I encourage them to say, guilt is a feeling of having failed in an obligation or having done something wrong. And I would like for you to take that word and put it on the shelf and replace it with the word regret. Regret is a sense of sadness, disappointment, wishing that things could be different. So I just give some examples, just briefly. I regret that I sometimes lose my temper and I say horrible things that I wish I could take back. I regret that I resent the amount of time that it takes. I regret that I resent how much money it costs. And sometimes I think about the financial aspect before I think about the benefit to my care receiver. I regret that I've made promises in the past that I'm not going to be able to keep. I regret that our relationship has changed. I regret that I don't enjoy spending time with them. And I regret that there are times when I wish they would just die and get it over with. But I don't do guilt anymore. So then, then that's a small piece of it. But I think that really makes a difference for a lot of people in their feelings, like they're being a bad person because they have these feelings, and they can offload
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, your feelings are your feelings.
Right.
And you can't control that you have them. They
Right.
just occur.
Right.
And so it just means that you're a human being. It doesn't mean you're a bad person.
Yeah, but you can give up the self-flagellation.
Exactly. Yeah. Move on from that.
Do exactly.
That's not helping anybody, and it's certainly not helping me. Well, so here's a question that I have for you. I would imagine that one thing a caregiver might also feel guilty about specifically is doing anything that is not 100% about their care receiver. In other words, something that's just for the caregiver.
Right. You're so right. And that's just so wrong. I just hammer this message home. Self-care is not selfish. Because
that's brilliant. I love that.
And I don't think it's original, but it is so true that if you are sacrificing all of your physical, emotional, mental energy, and spending that towards somebody else's care. Now, we can all do that for a short period of time, right? There's a short-term crisis. You just put everything else on hold and you focus on doing whatever has to be done to help the person who needs it. But if you're going to be doing this for 3 or 5 or 15 or 20 years, you cannot maintain that without becoming resentful and, maybe physically exhausted, burned out. You get compassion fatigue. You lose the ability to feel empathy and to care. And that's just not a place you want to be.
Right. Yeah.
It just doesn't work. Yeah.
I just want to say that again. Self-care is not selfish. I just think that's so perfect.
You know what? That applies to all of us, regardless of what we're doing, whether it's our work or our children or anything that, in relationships. I really think if we can take care of ourselves, we have more to give.
More to give.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's the classic oxygen mask analogy. When those oxygen masks drop, get yours on first, and then worry about helping other people. Same thing. So, Elaine, you have these caregiver modules, and I know, I think you referred to one of them as at least when you and I have been talking, you call it ducks in a row.
Yes.
You want to talk about that?
I do. And this came about, it's not in the original course that's on my website. This all came about because I was the executor for my parents' estate, and then I was the personal representative for my Aunt Jean's estate. And together, my husband and I have 8 children. Can you imagine how many potential conflicts there could be with that when we both die? So I've had so many friends who have called, Kirsten, and they will say, my mother's been diagnosed with dementia. My husband has been told that he has Lewy bodies. What do I do? The first thing I always say is, I am so terribly sorry. This is hard. My heart is with you. The second thing I say or ask is, do they have their end of life documents in order? And I know this surprises people sometimes, but after having these experiences of settling my parents and my Aunt Jean's estate, I know what can go wrong. If people, and my parents had a trust and Aunt Jean had a will, but she was so secretive and stubborn that she would not share her advance directive with me or those other documents. And I can tell you, it's when they don't plan it right. If people get cheap, like my parents did, they make some assumptions about how all of the children will behave, and that you just should never, ever do that. So would you, I always talk about what I think are the 3 essentials that people need, but you're the attorney. Could you share those, what you think people absolutely must have?
Well, sure, I'd be happy to. And regular listeners have probably heard this coming out of my mouth before, but it always bears repeating, especially when you're trying to care for somebody who's either incapacitated or likely to become incapacitated. It is so important that they have a power of attorney to handle legal and financial matters. A healthcare directive, you've got to have that in place. Otherwise, the doctors are going to do what they think is best, which may not be what you think is best. And so those are the most critical things, I think. And then worrying about what will happen after you pass away, that would be a will or a trust or some combination of those. What I would say is those kinds of things, that what happens after I die, it's great, get that done. But the most important thing is the documents that enable somebody else to help you while you're alive.
Exactly.
Those things that happen after your death, we don't want it to be messy, but it's not as critical. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, you are so right. And with my Aunt Jean, she had been so healthy. We moved her here when she was 80. She lived in Florida. We live in Oregon. We moved her here when she was 80, and she was in an active retirement community about 4 minutes from our house. So she was very much a part of our family, and she didn't drive, So, I mean, we were very involved in her aging process, right? On her 90th birthday, she said it was the best birthday she had ever had. We had a big family gathering, and then a month later, we had another family thing coming up, and I went to pick her up, and she looked horrible. And she said, I can't go tonight. I came back in the morning, ended up taking her to the hospital. This was like on a Friday, and on Sunday morning, the nurse told me, Jean may not make it, and we need to have her advance directive. Otherwise, we're going to have to do chest compressions, put in a pacemaker, she'll probably have to go to a nursing home. Fortunately, her attorney was a personal friend of mine. 7:30 Sunday morning, I got a hold of him at home, and he went to the office, got her advance directive, and sent it to the hospital. And if I had not had that on Sunday at 11 o'clock Sunday night, when she had a heart attack, they would have done all of
They would have resuscitated her. Yeah,
resuscitated her. So it was a difficult decision not to have them put in a pacemaker on one hand, but having gone through what I had to go through with my dad at his end of life, I know there are some things that are much worse than death.
Yeah.
And, to be kept alive, to suffer, in my opinion, is much worse than death. And Jean had given me the authority to make that decision. And so she died on Monday night. The family was there. She was comfortable. They kept her from being in pain. And she had 90 really good years.
Yeah.
And so, you have to feel good about that. At least I did.
Yeah, I think that's a win. And so one of the points here is, yes, get yourself a healthcare directive, but make sure somebody has a copy of it.
Right. That's right.
I've had that weekend phone call.
I bet
and driven to my office, but you can't count on that. That's not.
No.
You can't count on that.
No. What if you were on vacation? What if my guy had decided it's Sunday morning? I'm not answering.
I'm not picking up the phone. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think families really need to get that in place, and then you avoid all of these emotional meltdowns in hospital corridors. Do you keep them on life support? Do you not?
Right.
These are really important decisions. And I think it's so critical that we each make those decisions for ourselves, and then, give people the documents that tells them what we want. So
Right. Make sure they know what
exactly
kinds of decisions you want them making.
Yeah. And that's the only thing that I go into, kind of the nuts and bolts. But I do really think that is so critically important, and can save so much heartbreak.
Elaine, when you're helping caregivers, what kind of advice do you have for them, or how do you help them handle the fear that they have? There's a lot of fear. How long is this going to last? What if I can't handle it at a certain point? What if it becomes too much for me? Those are worries or fears. How can you help them manage that?
So it might not surprise you to know that I have a segment on that.
No, it does not.
I have a module called the 3 F's of flipping out, which are fear, frustration, and fatigue. And when we're talking about fear, basically I say, you have a couple of choices. You can either hide from it. You can obsess over it and just let it wake you up in the middle of the night every night, or you can face it. So if you decide to face it, then I really encourage people to, I have a 3-step process I call developing an attitude of creative indifference. And the first step is to become aware. So I ask them to sit down and write the things that are frightening to them. And, what is it? What are you fearful of? And what you just said, how bad is it going to get? How long is it going to last? How much is it going to cost? Those are 3
big ones. Yeah.
And, is my health going to hold up? What if we can't continue to live in this house? What if we have to move? What are we going to do for money? How are we going to pay for care? All of these things. So I believe that when you write them down, it provides clarity, and then you can look at them, and the next step is acceptance. And I think you look at these, and when you're caregiving for somebody who has dementia or a progressive and ultimately fatal disease, some of the things that you fear are going to happen. So if you can identify the things that are likely to happen, that's one category. And then the last category is, what is the worst possible thing that could happen? And I tell them to take that and just put that aside for a little bit, but then look at the things that are likely to happen, and then ask, okay, who can help? What needs to be done? What needs to be done now? What can be done in the future? So, if you're, say, let's go back to the ducks in a row. If you're afraid that it's going to take all of the money that you have to take care of them, and you're going to end up being financially destitute, who can you go to? What can you do? And my first recommendation would be, to see an attorney.
Right.
See how you could set up a well spouse trust, or whatever they call it in
your state. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, with fear, that to me, facing it, what's the worst possible thing that could happen? And when you name that, then you have some choices. Okay, is there anything that I can do preventatively to avoid that from happening? Or what can I do afterward if it does happen? What are my choices? What are the options?
Yeah, I really like that advice. Just, treat it like a project. Fear. I got to handle this fear.
Right.
It's going to kill me. Now I'm going to turn it into a project. And I really like that the first thing you said when, addressing it is, who can help?
Yeah, exactly.
Don't always think that you're alone in this and you've got to deal with everything on your own, which is...
There are so many resources out there, Kirsten.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are there on caregiverhelp.com. So I'm just reminding everybody, please check it out. There's so much there, and it's free.
Right, it's good. And the other thing I always encourage people to do is to call their local area agency on aging.
Yeah.
And you can Google the letter N and the number 4 and the letter A .org, and that will pop up a page, and you enter your zip code or the zip code, of your care receiver, and then you can get their contact information and the resources that are offered through the area agencies on aging are varied depending on the state, but they can provide some wonderful things for you. And this is a federally funded program. So, things like home delivered meals, like respite care, help with figuring out Medicare, Medicaid, that kind of thing. They're really very helpful to people. So a lot of people are just not aware of that service.
Yeah, that's really great that you link that into this conversation too, because that complements what you're doing.
It does.
Yeah, thank you so much. Now, you also, I'm just going to end this with one or two more questions, but I think you give webinars nowadays, not presentations, but you do things in that realm to organizations. People can reach out to you and have you present for their organization?
Yes, absolutely. I did transition to doing live virtual keynotes. I did that. I started, I guess, in June of last year when everything shut down in March. Then I had the in-home studio built, and I'll tell you, the learning curve was straight up. Because I was used to speaking to audiences, where you'd have several hundred people, and speaking to a camera by yourself in a converted storeroom is a whole lot different than that. But after several, what I would say, really good attempts with marginal results, I think we got it figured out.
You've landed on a good system. Yeah.
So I do that because of my husband's age and current health. I've decided that I no longer want to travel. I don't like leaving him at home, and it's too difficult. Travel has become really hard. And often I would be flying for a day, speaking for a day, flying back. And so it's like, this is, it's a transition time for me, and it's working. And I feel like I can reach actually more people through this, because I can do the keynotes, but I'm hoping through the caregiver support group program that I'm hoping will be offered through like churches and area agencies on aging and organizations that offer caregiver support. I feel like I have reached thousands of people through my website and through the events where I've spoken before, but I have missed millions, Kirsten. I have. There are 48 million unpaid caregivers out there, and my hope is to reach most of them.
Yeah, this is a much more efficient way to do it.
Yeah,
the online. You can touch a lot of people in a day when you're not sitting on an airplane. Yeah.
Right. This support group program can be led by other people. It doesn't have to be led by me. So it includes a workbook, facilitator's guide, and by the way we've put it together, I think anyone can lead it.
Okay. All right. So if folks have organizations that want to tap into that too, they can go to caregiverhelp.com and get that going. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love that.
All right.
We're going to release it. The release date is October the 4th.
Okay. All right.
We're putting finishing touches on it now. Yet
another resource that is available and so helpful. So helpful. So I'm gonna remind our listeners, it's caregiverhelp.com is Elaine's website.
Mhm.
Tremendous resource. The book, Letters from Madeline, and you can find that wherever you buy books. And Elaine, thank you so much for your time here today. I know my clients are out there listening, and they will benefit tremendously from this. So
Thank you, Kirsten. I appreciate what you're doing. It's a tremendous service, and again, I'm honored to be a guest on your show. So thank you.
You are welcome.
All right. I hope you got even a tenth of what I got out of that interview. That was just fantastic. I really appreciate you being here. I'm glad you were here to see this and listen to it. And I hope you learned something that's useful to you. If you like our podcast, be sure to go to iTunes and subscribe to our podcast. That helps us. All you have to do is click on that purple button on your phone and type in the words Absolute Trust Talk, or you can type in my name and you will find our podcast, and then you subscribe, and then you won't miss any episodes. That helps us with our SEO and all of that kind of stuff that's important to business owners. Besides searching for us on iTunes, you can always find all our episodes on our website, absolutetrustcounsel.com. There's all kinds of stuff there, newsletters, blogs, podcasts, videos, lots of resources. So I hope you take advantage and help yourself to anything that you might find that's useful there. Also, make sure to catch our next episode. We'll be in a couple of weeks again live here on Facebook. I know you'll get a lot out of that one too. And until then, I look forward to connecting with you next time.